Welcome to ConTinual, the never-ending convention. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and I will be your host tonight in this writing track exploration of everybody's favorite legendary beast. Here, indeed, be dragons. With me tonight are four wonderful writers of dragons in a fiction period. Mari Mancusi, James Maxey, Renee Bagby, and Michael Swanwick. Welcome, everyone. Okay, as is usual, our first, if you will, question, or our first moments in the panel will be devoted to introductions. I'm just going to ask folks to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their dragons. Start it off, James.
All right, so I'm James Maxey. I actually have a dragon with me. This is Verdant. He is my spokes dragon. Whenever I sell books at conventions, I spend a lot of time flapping the dragon, and he is very good at selling books. Flapping the dragon sounds like a terrible euphemism for something, but
yes, it does. But
so I have two different dragon series, and starting a third. My first was the Bitterwood series, and it is a blend of science fiction and fantasy. It's really just a fantasy novel with all the magic swapped out for science fictional elements. After I wrote a fantasy series with no magic, I wrote the Dragon Apocalypse, which is another giant brick of a book that could also be used as a murder weapon, and went the opposite direction with very mythical, magical based dragons in a world where there isn't even, the sun is not a giant ball of gas, it's a dragon that flies across the sky every day. And my newest series is called Dragon's Gate. It is a continuation. It's set in the same world as the Bitterwood series. In the Bitterwood series, the dragons in this post-apocalyptic landscape have found dinosaur bones in museums, and they assume that they're their ancestors. And in Dragon's Gate, there's a bit of chicanery to bring dinosaurs into the picture. So it's Dungeons and Dragons and Dinosaurs. The nerdiest book I've ever written. Anytime I talk about it, I have to look over my shoulder to make sure that jocks from high school aren't going to jump out and try to shove me into a locker.
But the dinosaurs will get them if they do.
That's true.
Yes. Renee?
Oh, goody, it's my turn. I'm D. Renee Bagby. I also write as Zenobia Rehnquist. I have one dragon book that was out, but then I had to pull it because I wanted to fix it and turn it into a trilogy. My dragons are elemental magical based. They their colors match their element, which is something the heroine figures out on her own, and they're like, oh god, that's a secret. So that series is a from our Earth to theirs type thing, which some people make it sci-fi for some reason. I'm just like, no, it's just a different dimension. Let's see, what else?
Portal fantasy, perhaps.
It's totally fantasy. It's got talking dragons. Oh, that's the other thing. It is a fantasy romance. I like to call it a high fantasy romance. The dragon's not a shifter. He is a 2-story tall dragon, and she is a normal human. You got to read the book to figure out to see how they figured that out.
That could be complex.
I came up with a cute way to get them together. But yeah, that's one of those you have to read the book type things because it has to do with his element. Instead, I had pulled it from the publisher it was at, and I was going to tweak it. Tweaking became a complete rewrite, so it could fit in with the second book that I had already started, and the third book that's planned but not started yet. So it was supposed to be done by June, but then February happened, and I'm still writing it. So,
well, hopefully it will be out soon. Michael?
25 years ago, my wife and I were driving to Pittsburgh to visit her parents. And we were driving along, we were talking about fantasy, and we were talking about steam locomotives. And I made a joke about the Baldwin Steam Dragon Works. And Marianne laughed. We drove on almost another mile, and I said, write that down for me, would you? And by the time we got to Pittsburgh, I had the idea for a novel about a girl who's been stolen by the fairies and forced to work in a factory building dragons. And people said, okay, when's the next book coming out? And I'm saying, at the end of this book, she escapes. She comes back to our world. And she'd been Jane Alderberry had been a wonderful character. I was not going to have her wake up one day back in this, what to her was a really terrible place. But then 10, 14 years later, somebody asked me for an Iron Dragon story, and I said, I don't have any, but if I do, and the way it sometimes happens, I went home and immediately the story popped into my head. So I wrote it, and it was a good story, but I looked at it and said, this is the first chapter of a novel. So then I had the Dragons of Babel. When you have one novel, it's a novel. When you have two novels, it's an unfinished trilogy. So I immediately left to work, and 10 years later, I wrote the Iron Dragon's Mother. So it's a trilogy of standalone novels with dragons.
Uh-huh. And a very unique conception of them. They are not just organic, are they?
No, they're basically, they're somewhere between fighter planes and bombers. They're machines of war. And I think that got in touch with the original Western dragon, which is that they're beautiful and powerful and evil. So,
yes, one could say the same about most weapons of war. Is there anything more beautiful than a katana?
well, if you stand in front of the Enola Gay, that's a terrifying moment.
Yes.
It has an awful beauty.
Yes, that's it exactly. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mari Mancusi. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm an author of about 29 books for kids, teens, adults. I do a little bit of everything, but mostly sci-fi fantasy, and I've done a lot of dragon stuff in the last, I guess, 7 years. So yeah, in 2013, my first dragon book came out. It was called Scorched. And basically, I like to compare it to Terminator, but with dragons. So imagine in the future, there's been a dragon apocalypse. It has decimated the world. Mankind is barely hanging on, living underground. And the government says, well, we can send someone back in time to our present day to try to stop this thing. So they send this dragon hunter, Connor, back in time to try to stop it. And unbeknownst to them, there's this dragon animal rights group called the Draken that want to save dragons because they realize the first time around we treated them horribly, we cloned them, we used them as biological weapons of mass destruction, and we did it all wrong. So if we go back and actually, now that we know about dragons, we can fix it and we can keep dragons in the world, and we don't have to destroy this one first dragon, and we can make this work. So the two twin brothers are at odds with one another, and then the girl, Trinity, is the one in between them, who is a normal 21st century teen who knows nothing about this, but ends up in possession of the world's first dragon egg. So sci-fi fantasy kind of mashed together in this series, and it was a trilogy. It was Scorched, Shattered, and Smoked. So that was my first foray into dragons. And then I just liked writing about them so much. I had done a time travel series called The Camelot Code. And in the second book, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to introduce a dragon, but a very different kind of dragon. This is a little baby dragon. This dragon is actually the Holy Grail. And Merlin's apprentice, who isn't very good yet, accidentally turns the Holy Grail into a very gassy baby dragon. And the goal of this book is to get the dragon back into Grail form before it's too late. And then finally, my newest book, which just came out in May, is Dragonops. Again, another very different interpretation of dragons. This one is an AI dragon. And so the idea in this is it's kind of like a Jurassic Park meets Ready Player One, where these kids are going to the world's very first augmented reality video game theme park on an island that hasn't been quite open to the public yet, but their uncle works in the game. So they go and get to have this beta test, basically, of the game. And when they're in there, something goes very wrong, and this rogue AI dragon takes over and locks them in the game, and he's determined to win at any cost. So 3 very, very different dragon books, but it's just something that I love, a creature that I love, and I love being able to play with it in so many different formats and genres.
What was everybody's first encounter with dragons? I mean, was it something in fairy tales? Was there a particular moment you looked up and said, "Oh, these things are cool"? Renee?
I think my very first dragon had to be from Sleeping Beauty, but the first I fell in love with dragons was from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Granomir, because he was a big grumpy dragon. They woke him up to ask how to save their friend, and he's just like, "I'll tell you just so you'll go away." I liked him, and I really loved Briog from Flight of Dragons. I loved that cartoon to pieces. It's full of dragons, but I absolutely loved him. I didn't care that he was the evil dragon. I was just like, I really, really like him, and I want to ride him, but, cartoon.
Yeah, there's always that problem. James?
So I also was going to say Sleeping Beauty. That was probably the first film where I was like, oh, that's very cool. I will go ahead and lay claim to The Hobbit, probably stealing other people's answers too. Was also kind of one of my early introductions to a cool dragon quest fantasy. And then, the honest truth is after that, my view of dragons were greatly influenced by the Monster Manual from D&D. And
still both my answers.
Yeah. Sorry.
I love that one.
So yeah, whenever I was creating my my game world and designing my campaigns, dragons were just like the monsters to culminate with. So it wasn't a good quest unless it brought you in contact with a monster. There are plenty of other monsters to do, but if you're playing D&D, the prestige monster is the dragon. And since I was a DM, I got to do a lot of being right ahead of the dragon.
You got to be the dragon as the DM practically. Yeah. Mary?
Well, besides the fact he stole both of my answers, and Sleeping Beauty also as well, obviously all those things. I think that I'm going to give a different answer. One, it was a little later, but I was still probably in elementary school. I read The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. And that was such an amazing story to me because, when we grew up, girls didn't have a lot of female action, like heroines to really root for, like you have like Princess Leia, the one token girl in Star Wars, like that kind of thing. So I always looked for female fantasy figures that I could really, dig into. And the girl in Hero and the Crown, she's this amazing dragon slayer. And it's not all like girly and glamorous and all that. It's like dark and dirty, and she gets severely burned and almost dies, and it's just really gritty. And I just love that story so much, and it really, really influenced me as far as falling in love with fantasy and dragons. So thank you, Robin McKinley.
Robin McKinley is a wonderful writer, that's for sure. Michael, was this something from childhood, or did you just
I was in contrast to most writers, of course, I was a very bookish kid, so I read everything in the children's library, and it all sort of mushed together, I'm afraid. Probably would have been the first one would have been My Father's Dragon, which is it's a very odd book about a brave little boy who befriends a dragon, and then he finds that the dragons are being enslaved, so he goes and he saves them. And if you look at that book, I can see a lot of stuff downstream. You kind of go, I wonder if they read this book. I wonder if those movies about befriending dragons were written by people who read this when they were kids. Really good children's literature, young children's literature, is astonishingly hard to write great books of. They're all kinds of these strange freaks. And I don't think we give them enough credit. That's all.
They certainly do have an impact all throughout people's lives. I was reading an article today about somebody who had to read to her mother on her last day. And she went to the book she read to her own children, because those were the only ones that had the resonance for talking to her dying mother. So I agree with you. They are the things that resonate powerfully throughout someone's life and influence things continuously. Yeah.
I had a friend who was in the hospital with a brain embolism. So I went to read to her. I couldn't find the copy of The Wind in the Willows. So I went to a bookstore and bought an old shabby copy and brought it. And I found out in the front, the person who had bought this had written down the time and date when he read this book to each of his children for the first time. And then the last entry in the front, he said, I had the honor of visiting the author at his house and am pleased to report that he was everything that the author of this book would be. So it's just kind of a wonderful, magic, awful moment for me.
Yes, exactly. That's grand, though. I mean, how many times can you say that of an author? Especially ones that you admire. Sometimes they all have feet of clay. You mentioned in your introduction that you were inspired to write The Iron Dragon's Daughter by watching this steam engine and thinking of dragons. Did you have any desire to write about dragons before then, or was it just that moment, that inspiration, and that was it for you?
I had a great desire to read about dragons. I think I'm the oldest person here, so I can remember when dragons were rare. They were an endangered species, and you almost never got any stories about dragons. It's like Tolkien said that in all medieval literature, there are only two real dragons. And one was Fafnir, and the other was the Beowulf dragon. And it's as if they've been slowly building up their population. And then sometime in the 1980s, they had a bloom. And now there are dragons everywhere. But I can remember Keith Roberts had a collection of stories called The Passing of Dragons. And I thought, what a wonderful title. And they didn't put a dragon on the cover. It drove me mad. At that time, there were very few pictures or statuettes or anything of dragons. If I had found a dragon other than an oriental dragon, I would have bought it immediately. But I was kind of surprised to find myself writing about dragons, but I was not surprised to find myself reading other people's books about dragons.
Because it was something you'd longed for. James?
So I don't know what the question was. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I phrased it badly.
Yeah.
The thing is, what was the inspiration that started you writing about dragons? Okay. Writing about them instead of reading them.
All right. First, I'm going to comment on something Michael said, which is when I was growing up in the 70s, just finding fantasy books at all was kind of rare. I lived in a town where, I wasn't like going to bookstores. If I'd gone to a bookstore, I wouldn't have had money. So basically I'm left with what's in my school library. And there were science fiction books, but fantasy was just a very weird niche that was not the predominant cultural force that it is today. So it is weird that looking back at how much the choices that are available today have changed. As far as why I started writing dragons, I always wanted to be a writer, shock. And I wrote this very serious book when I was 25. It was called A Distant Invisible Ocean. It was a very literary novel with unreliable narrators and nonlinear time. And a friend of mine that I played D&D with read it and gave me a brilliant critique of, this reads like it was written by someone who's never read a book. he says, I don't get it. You know, you play D&D every week. You're this big science fiction nerd. You know, why aren't you writing about, you know, dragons and stuff? And so I was like, well, you know, I guess, you know, all right, maybe it's not my role to be the next great you know, intellectual writer of the era. And so I wrote a novel very originally called Dragons. It's never been published, but it was about a laboratory genetically engineering dragons, basically because of a mad scientist. It was not the most original thing. And that novel I judged to be unpublishable, but I kept thinking, it's like, well, what happens to the dragons that I had escape at the end of that book? You know, what happens like 1,000 years later after dragons have conquered the world? And that's when I started writing Bitterwood.
Renee?
Let's see. I'm not totally sure. When I first started writing, I just wanted to write. Well, the reason why I started writing was because I wanted to see a Black heroine get into the same trouble as the white heroines did. So I wanted to write about vampires. I wanted to write about dragons. I wanted to write about like the alien prince coming down from the world, just so long as I could see those stories from basically my point of view. So, and then of course, like I said, I love dragons. And so that was just one of those ones where I was like, okay, I have to write a dragon book, but I just got to figure out how to write the dragon book and the story I wanted. And it's like, do I want it to be a shifter romance? Do I want it to be another type of, and like I said before, 2-story tall dragon, not a shifter. So.
That's going to be complicated. Yes, indeed. Mary, what inspired you to write about dragons and to write about them so often?
Well, when I was coming up with the idea of Scorched, I had just gotten off of an 8-book series on vampires, the Blood Coven Vampire series. So I was a little burnt out on vampires, and I thought a lot of people are burnt out on vampires at this point, and I wanted to do something fresh. I had also written recently a zombie apocalypse romance, not like the zombies being the romantic ones, but kind of like a horror romance apocalypse story. And so I was like, okay, well, I kind of did the zombie thing. So I kind of just brainstormed of like things that I like and what are my fandoms. And I thought about dragons, and I thought, I don't want to write your typical fantasy dragon, medieval set fantasy, because it's just been done a billion times. I wanted to do something a little fresher, a little more interesting. And I had seen this movie a while back called Reign of Fire, which I don't know if you've seen, but it's like Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey. And it's this really fun, maybe not super well done, but great concept film about a dragon apocalypse. And I was like, well, I really love that idea, but I don't want to, again, do the same exact thing. So I thought, what if I took this idea of a dragon apocalypse, but brought it back like pre-dragon apocalypse? Can we stop it? Are we going to have fate, or, are we destined to do this, or can we change our fate? Terminator kind of esque plot. And so I kind of mashed everything together, things that I just like personally. And that's kind of what came out. So, and then once I did that, I did the 3 books, and everyone kept asking for more dragon stuff. And so just like with the vampires, like you get locked into something, and I was like, why not? Because I enjoy writing about them. Why don't I keep going and come up with different ways to bring dragons into books?
Okay, cool. This is something that's occurred to me while I'm listening to people, is that sometimes your work seems to be in conversation with other works, whether, Reign of Fire, which you specifically mentioned. There were elements of Iron Dragon's Daughter, specifically what happens to the heroine at one point after her adventures in Fairy, that made me think of Zelazny's Amber books, especially the opening with Corwin. And so I was wondering, are these things consciously conversations with other works, or is it just the mind throws this up as a stew? There's no right answer here. I'm just going to go through everybody again and say, was it a conscious conversation, or was it just it happened because that's what the guys / girls / dragons in the basement decided to throw up at you. Renee, conscious conversation?
I'm not
Or-
totally sure. No, let's see. No, I know what it was. I saw, like I said, I love Breog from Flight of Dragons, and I was like, I want my black dragon, and I'm going to make him a lovable, from my perspective, black dragon. And that's how I got that one, but I'm not totally sure if that was, no, probably not conscious. I wanted to have a black dragon, but I didn't want him to be evil, because the black dragon's always evil. But then I always gravitate towards them. Let's say it was Breog, there was Deathwing. I love Deathwing. I had to get the pop for him. I was like, oh my god, they have a mini Deathwing. Anyway, so I didn't care that he was like world destroying. I just wanted him. There were certain things from different stuff where I was like, I love Dragonheart, and I was like, okay, so I want a really big dragon. I wanted him to be able to hold her in his hand. But yeah, no, probably not conscious. Just like little aspects from this and little aspects for that. I saw Reign of Fire. I really loved Reign of Fire. Even though it had some elements where I was just like, that's kind of not fair. You guys are beating up on this dragon that you woke up. I mean, they were just sleeping underground, minding their own business, and then you woke them up and they were angry. I totally empathize with that, because I'm the same way. I can't like burn stuff up and wreak destruction across the world, but at least according to my husband, I can, but.
Yes, yeah. One's husband does tend to say that about us, don't they? Won't go there. Anyway, Michael, was the depiction of dragons, or the book Iron Dragon's Daughter, or the Dragons of Babel, or Iron Dragon's Mother, were any of them conscious conversations with other works, or were they just the creatures in the basement were having their day?
It's kind of a yes and no. I was aware of what all the other dragons were, and I wanted mine to not be like them. Not that I disliked Anne McCaffrey's dragons. When you read 20 books in a series, you can't claim that you don't like it. But I didn't want to be an imitation Anne McCaffrey, for example, which made it very ironic. And they wrote the Iron Dragon's Daughter. I went to visit my publishers, and they showed me the cover for the book. Let's see if you can see that. Can't quite see well. In person, it's a little more clear. I looked at this, and they said, well, what do you think, Michael? I said, it looks like an Anne McCaffrey novel. And they said, yes, we're going to get all the Anne McCaffrey readers are going to pick it up, thinking it's going to be just like hers, and they'll read your book and they'll love it. And I was going, I like Anne McCaffrey too, but if I had my mouth all set for a nice Anne McCaffrey and you put this thing in it, I'd be very upset. Yeah. And indeed, it turned out that people who read this book ready for an Anne McCaffrey novel were really offended.
Yeah, that's a problem with marketing, because they always try to do what succeeds before, but if you raise the wrong expectations, not good. But it didn't seem to hurt in the awards categories, so there is that. Mary, were you in conscious conversation with anything beyond Reign of Fire, or was it just happenstance that you decided to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've internalized so many dragon mythos and lore and fandoms from so many sources, whether it's George R.R. Martin or Dungeons and Dragons or Tolkien or, just Dragon's Lair video game. I mean, just my whole life has been like, and you just get all, and then you kind of just mash it all up in your brain, just like with vampire stories, you get to cherry pick, what are your dragons going to be like? Are they going to be fire dragons, ice dragons? Are they going to be artificially intelligent computer program dragons? And then you get to kind of just make your own thing based on, the fandom that you love. And I think that really works. It brings in something original to the table, but it's familiar enough for fandom, people who like dragons, to say, I like that about dragons too. I like your dragons because they're fire dragons or what have you. On the other end of things, I got a lot of people saying with Scorch that it was like Aragon, which is more of a fantasy, but there is a similarity in that the heroine discovers the egg and the egg hatches and they have a bond. Now, I don't think that's a terribly novel concept for dragons, that they would have a bond, and I hadn't actually read Aragon when I wrote the book, but a lot of people are like, oh, this is just like Aragon, except, you know, it's in the 21st century and it's about the apocalypse. But, you know, besides that, it's, you know, like, so it had one element that was similar to a very popular children's series. And so it constantly got compared to that, to the point where I'm like, it's not like Aragon, you know, or if it is, it was accidental because I hadn't read the story before I wrote it. So, yeah, so that was a little annoying, but what are you going to do?
Hey, synchronicity happens. Do you remember The Prestige? And there was one other Edward Norton movie that, you know, dealt with the same themes, and they were completely produced independently. Nobody knew what anybody else was doing, but they happened to hit the theaters at like almost the same time.
Yeah, it was The Prestige and The Illusionist.
And if you're going to go with Dragon Bonds, why not go with Anne McCaffrey? I would be like, yes, totally. That would be like, but you know, what are you going to do? And I think that it helps people to see familiar things in a way in their books, things they can like relate to and be like, I like that. So it's not all bad.
Tropes are useful. They definitely are. James, you know, were you in conversation with anything when you were devising the, you know?
So yes, but I want to toss in to tag on to Marie's comment there. Whenever my second dragon book came out, it was called Dragon Forge, and I had come up with that name by going onto Google and typing in dragon and just about any other noun you could think of. You know, it's like, oh, there's already been a dragon crown, there's a dragon sword, there's a dragon mace, you know. And so finally I came up with Dragon Forge, and that was going to be the title. That would be a unique title. And the day my book came out, another publishing house released a book called Dragon Forge. The same week, you know, from two different houses, they came out, and they were both second books in a trilogy. And my hero was named Graxen, Graxen. Their hero was named Graven, Graven.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness.
So,
mine was bad.
So yes, you really cannot control these. There's just something in the atmosphere that causes these things to materialize. So the Dragon Apocalypse books that I did were very much a reaction to my years playing D&D. I had been talking with other people about, you know, fantasy novels and about the cliche of the plot line of a fantasy novel would be you put a band of adventurers together and send them on a quest to kill a dragon. And then I just start thinking, you know, except for Tolkien, I don't know that I've actually read that specific plot. You know, it's like the archetypical plot, but no one's gone to explore that territory again. And so I really wanted to put together sort of this great archetypical D&D party with the goal of killing a very dangerous dragon. And then the way that I twisted everything around was, instead of using a traditional fantasy party of, you know, a thief and a warrior and a wizard, all the characters had super powers. So it was basically a team of X-Men or a medieval Justice League going out to slay this dragon. And so it was written with a lot of awareness of what had come before, and wanting to get in a niche and twist it to something that I hadn't read before.
Cool. That's wonderful.
Can I just interject with a
go right ahead.
title? Sorry, it just sparked my remembrance. So when I started the Scorch series, it was originally called Dragonbound because I like the idea of them being, you know, the girl and the dragon being bound. And the publisher said, well, we can't call it dragon bound because it really limits their audience, because if they don't like dragons, they're not going to pick up the book. And I'm like, maybe they shouldn't pick up the book, right? They're going to be awful disappointed. And they figure it out that, you know, like, oh, wait, it's actually like the entire thing is about dragons. So then I was like, okay, well, you guys are the boss. And so they decided on Scorched, right? And I was like, well, that's a cool title. I don't have any problem with that. And then they put this on the cover.
Yeah.
Like, you're not fooling anyone. No one's going to be like, is this a vampire book? Like, come on. So it's funny how those all shake out sometimes.
Hey, has anybody done a vampire dragon?
Ooh.
There you go, your next story.
Well, now that you put that
Evil
out
thoughts here, yes, evil thoughts. Okay, you know, you all have very different bases for your dragons. Where there, you know, we've talked about, you know, the inspirations, etc. But the other aspect that, you know, people don't realize when you write anything, especially something as wide-ranging as science fiction or fantasy, is that a lot of your conflict, a lot of the narrative drive of your work comes from the strictures and limitations you put on your characters. What were the limitations or strictures you set upon yourself when you were creating your dragons and the world in which they lived? Michael, I'm going to go with you first this time.
Oh, goodness. Well, my version is basically is industrialized Faerie. They had the Industrial Revelation, and now they have cars and Armani suits and so on. And at the same time, all the other, you know, dwarves, dragons, et cetera, that we love in fantasy. I really think the only serious limitation was that Jane Alderbury had to act like a real girl. And as a male, writing a female character, I think that was the first time I ever did that. I don't know. But like, you know, getting into her at a time when she's discovering things like sex, etc., I found that the most fascinating thing about it was discovering how central to girls' lives men aren't. And just having her act like a real person just taught me so much about half of the population of Earth.
Yeah, a friend was discussing female characters recently, and how a male writer said to her how difficult it was to write women with motivation who hadn't been raped.
Oh.
And basically, this friend of mine stood up on her hind legs, and she's almost, by the way, 6 foot tall, and said, "Women's motivations are the same as men's." And I think the guy backed down real fast. But yeah, it's really interesting how we view each other, let us just say, because sometimes as women writers, we have a similar problem getting into the head of men. So anyway, Renee, did you put any strictures on or limitations on your dragons or your world?
I did not. I wanted to get away from the traditional dragon, so I didn't want them to breathe fire. Like the humans who live with them, not with them, near them, they're actually at war with the humans, think that all dragons breathe fire. So I wanted to make it so my, the main character dragon, his element is shadows. So he can do anything he wants with shadows, travel through shadows, blend in with them, hear stuff through shadows and stuff like that. There is a fire-breathing dragon, but she's a sister-in-law and you don't see her that much. So that was one of the things I wanted to do, was just like get away from the whole, oh, you're a dragon, you automatically breathe fire, I don't care what color you are. So I wanted to do away with that little type of thing. Other than that, not really, just like big giant lizard.
Okay, well, you always got to watch out for those in-laws. I think everybody will agree with that one. James, did you've got scientific dragons, you've got fantasy dragons. What were the strictures, the limitations that you imposed upon yourself?
So my dragon puppet is actually anatomically correct, but not in the phrase that you would use that.
Okay, we're not talking data, are we?
Yeah, so we're talking though that he has 4 limbs. So he has 2 wings and 2 legs. Whereas a fantasy dragon quite frequently will be a hexapod. They'll have 4 legs and 2 wings. And it's, there are no earthly vertebrates. It's just not in our genetic toolkits to have a 6-limbed vertebrate. So I wanted to make sure that my dragons followed earthly biology laws. So the biggest dragons have a 40-foot wingspan, and I went with that because the largest pterosaur ever to fly had a 40-foot wingspan. They are not fire breathers because I couldn't plausibly, there's, plenty of little fantasy explanations you can come up with, but they are very intelligent. And so for me, the biggest advantage that my dragons had over humans is the fact that they work together very well. They're smart enough to use weapons. So, instead of fighting humans on the ground, their preferred method in a war situation is they just fly above the range of arrows and drop buckets of darts down onto the troops and shred the humans with these aerial attacks. And the other thing is the dragons they cooperate together very well. So they have they have different personalities and different goals. They're definitely not monocultural, but the dragons basically unite against mankind, whereas if you put people from 3 different villages together in my world, they'll start arguing about who is the one true prophet and fighting each other while the dragons just come in and put down their rebellion. So the biggest stricture I did was making sure that anything that my dragons could do, I could point to an earthly creature, either dead or in the fossil record, that could do the same thing.
Which must have made it interesting when the dinosaurs showed up.
Yes. So I will guarantee that Dragonscape Doubles is the best dragon versus Tyrannosaurus Rex novel you'll read all year.
How can you top that? Okay, Mary, I'm going to give you the chance to try. What kind of strictures and limitations did you put upon your dragons when you were...
Yeah, in the Scorch series, the dragons can telepathically talk to humans, but only one human. So there are certain humans who are known as fire-kissed, and they have this special kind of ability that they are able to bond with dragons, and only one dragon. And so they are able to communicate back and forth in their minds with these dragons. But the dragons cannot talk to just anyone. And so they're often misunderstood. And I made them very dog-like too, like they love food. They're very food motivated, and they want to behave. I mean, they want to fit in and do the right thing, but they just don't understand humans. And especially in the 21st century where they're completely out of time, and so this dragon, sees this, goes to this football game, and they're spying on this football game, and the dragon decides she's going to land in the middle of the field and show off and do a little dance, and everyone's crowding around her, and she gets excited, they're watching me, this is cool. And then they try to capture her, and she freaks out, and she doesn't know what's going on and why they're throwing things at her, and they're scared. And so she starts lashing out, and she ends up burning someone, and she doesn't mean to, but it seems like a very violent act when you don't understand what's going on and you can't. And so the girl who can bond with the dragon is helplessly witnessing this and knowing that the dragon means no harm, but everyone thinks they're evil. And so that was kind of the way I wanted to play with it, because I really did want to say dragons are like animals, like any other. If you kick a dog and abuse it and starve it, it's going to bite you. And if you treat it well, it's going to be your best friend. And I think it was similar with dragons, or how I wanted to portray them.
Were there any additional strictures in depicting the dragon in the Camelot Code?
So the dragon in Camelot Code was kind of just a little funny baby dragon, and he didn't talk to anyone, and he just kind of is just this dopey little thing that breathes fire at the complete wrong moments. Like they're trying to get him through TSA security, dressing him up like a dog and trying not to get him to breathe fire, at the wrong moment. So I had a lot of fun playing with that. And then in Dragon Ops, it was tough because it has to be an artificially intelligent dragon, an AI dragon. It cannot have emotions. It is a computer program at the end of the day. So it is either gone rogue or it's following its programming. You're not quite sure, but it's not an evil being. It may be acting in a way that is bad and is going to result in your death, but it is following logic throughout all its decisions. And so it was very tricky a little bit to write. And not put in like this, smog, like evil, like character, and just to play with the idea that is, in the end of the day, a computer program.
Okay, cool. All right. People, dragons are like potato chips. You can't eat just one. And so I'm going, with that in mind, when people have exhausted reading about, all of your books, they've read them all cover to cover, frequently twice. What, if they're looking for their next dragon fix, what would you recommend? James?
So there's an author named E.E. Knight who wrote a series called Age of Fire, I'm going to say. And it is about a family of dragons. And it's told from the point of view of the dragons. And he does a lot of it's still a fantasy universe, but you get to follow the dragons as they're growing up, and the young dragons go their separate ways, then all come back together in the larger master plot over the course of the series. So it's a very, very good take on all the mythos.
Cool. Michael?
I'd recommend Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea books.
Mm-hmm.
The first story or two that she wrote with dragons, they were rather conventional. They were evil. And then they became something else. They were incredibly powerful and very smart. And they're able to lie in the true language. And in her system, if you know the true name of something, you have power over it. But this doesn't work with dragons. Nobody can lie in the true language, but dragons can. There's something else, and there's something beyond. And the further into the series she got, the better she understood dragons, and the more they became avatars of wisdom. Although a very strange, stony, terrifying wisdom. And I think at the heart of fantasy, there's this desire to touch the numinous, to delve with things that are really essentially spiritual. Like my wife likes to say that if she could have one magical power, she'd like to be just able to make a flame dance in her hand. Well, she's a biologist. She knows chemists. She could make this happen, but that's not what she wants. She wants that contact with magic, with the numinous. And it's the same reason why I'd like to be able to flood the room with light, but I haven't bought the clapper. It's people mistake magic for power, but that's not what it's about. We've got so much power, we're sick with it. And magic is just something wonderful and beyond. And Le Guin's dragons involved with that.
They do. Okay, Mary?
I really like Naomi Novik's series, and I'm going to murder the name of her dragon because I don't know how to say it. It's one of those things where you read all the books but you never know how to pronounce anything. Tamarir, I think that's how you say it. But it's about the Napoleonic Wars, and dragons are huge, and it's an alternate history, obviously, and they use them as basically their planes and their fighting forces. And so, you could have a dragon with like 20 men on the dragon and fighting the war, and different parts of the world have different styles of dragons, and they're all, fighting each other. And it's such a different and interesting take on dragons. And it's just it's both like a war novel, but also just a really personal novel of this guy and his dragon and their relationship. And I just really, really loved the series.
Yes, that's an amazing series. Renee?
I'm gonna do the Dragonish series by Stephanie Burke. She
Okay.
trilogy. Anyway, so sorry. What happened was she put it out when Red Rose Publishing was a thing, got it back, recently started putting it back out again. She got hung up on the third book, but it's coming soon. What happens is you have this woman who thinks she's human, but then she gets sacrificed by her human family and finds out that she is not in fact human. She is part of the Dragonish clan, which is these dragon shapeshifters. They go and one of them shows up and the people think, oh, the dragon's here and they'll eat her and they'll leave us alone. And he's like, no, she's my mate and thanks for bringing her. And they takes her off and she's freaking out because she's like, wait, what? I'm what now? I thought I was human. It's like, yeah, you're human with blue hair. She's like, well, I just thought it was weird. So they pick her up, take her back, and she becomes part of a dragon quad. So it's her and 3 other guys, and she has to figure out the society that she should have been born into, but she got lost, and navigate all that. And the story goes where she's figuring out her quad, then she's figuring out the society, and then the last book is figuring out the people who are trying to break up her quad, which I don't want to give away too much because that's the last book. But yeah, that series is so much fun, and it's kind of close to my heart because I'm trying to get her to finish up the 3rd book so we can finally get it out, because fans have been asking for it forever, and just we were this close, but then stuff happened and she's going through a family thing at the moment. So I'm just like, okay, as soon as you can write it, we're going to put it out. We've already got the cover. Let's go. Everybody's waiting.
And
So.
being Stephanie Burke, it probably has a lot of good humor in it because she writes funny.
So hilarious. There's one scene I'd love to tell you about, but it's anyway, so I can't really talk about it, but it was such a funny scene, and I helped her with it because I was like, what if you show what happens if they don't do it right? And she's like, oh, that's a perfect idea. Because, you know, in stories, you always show what happens when stuff goes right. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you don't show what happens when it goes wrong, then showing it go right is not as powerful. So I was like, show what happens when it goes wrong. And she's like, so in the very background, while the heroine is talking to her quad, here's like commotion, and there's another quad coming in, and one of them's just kind of crying in the background. One of the guys is crying, and she's like, what happened to him? And he's like, he did it wrong. And she's like, oh. So that was kind of a funny moment.
Good. That's great. Yeah, we'll have to look out for that. I would throw one into this, though it is not a Western dragon. It's R.A. McAvoy's Tea with the Black Dragon, which dates from the 1980s. And there, I assure you, Renee, the Black Dragon's the good guy.
Yay!
So I would suggest that one. Okay, we're coming up on the end of our hour, and we've got time for just 2 more questions, or we can combine them. And they are, A, what are you working on now? And where can folks find you on the web or wherever, if, you know, bookstores are us, that sort of thing. Michael, what are you working on right now?
I'm working on a lot of short stories. I've just finished 3, and I put them into the pie closet to cool off for a little bit before I look at them and decide where to send them and to do the final draft. And I'll probably finish another one this week. And I have a novel coming out next week, next month, in August, which I would like to promote shamelessly. Please. Because it's a collaborative novel I wrote with Gardner Dozois. And if I took the long story takes 20 minutes, so I'll just say we started working on this story 15 years ago, on this novel 15 years ago, and we put off it for a long time, but we had started it up again, and we were about 3/4 of the way through when Gardner died. So I finished this novel, which is Gardner's very famous for being a very bleak, dark writer. And this novel is one of the bleakest, darkest things that you can imagine. And it has something unique for a Gardner Dozois novel, which is a happy ending. And it was his happy ending. My wife was reading it, Marianne was reading it, and she was like 9/10 of the way through, and she says, this isn't going to end well, is it? And I said, no, it has a happy ending. And she says, oh yeah, one of your happy endings. I said, no, this is a real happy ending, a happy ending for everybody. And she read it and she wept and she admitted it was true. So I want everybody to know about this. It's not going to make me a lot of money. I want it to be sort of like a last memorial to gardeners as well. I want everybody to know that he went out on an up note.
His Tempest, as it were. Now, Shakespeare went out with a comedy as well. So, when is that coming out, and where is it? Which
It's coming
publisher?
out from Tor.com. It's a paperback original, and it's coming out, I believe, on the 20th of August.
Okay, cool. We should be.
Oh,
This should be.
Excuse me, I didn't say the titles. It's City Under the Stars.
That's important too.
That is. Thank you, Marianne.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you, Marianne. That was very important. City Under the Stars from Tour.com in mid-August. And you also have a new website, I believe? You yourself?
It's floggingbabel.blogspot.com. And that's my blog.
Okay. Okay, that's good. And there's a michaelswanwick.com, though you do not maintain that, correct?
I've been meaning to update that. I'm going to do that soon. Soon now, I promise.
That works. That works. Renee, what are you working on now? I presume it's the Dragon series and
My Dragon trilogy.
Yes.
And that, okay, I'm gonna try and get it done by June. No, actually, my new deadline for myself is gonna be the end of the year. Like, I really need to stop letting things get to me and just power through and finish it, because if I keep picking at it, I'm just going to be picking at it forever. So you know how that is. It's like, oh, I can tweak this, I can tweak that, and if I change this, no, just write the stupid book and get done. So there's that. Hopefully very, very soon it'll be finished and I'll have pre-orders up, because I already have the covers. I found this great cover artist, Warren Designs, and he had put up a cover in his pre-order group, our POC cover art group. And I was like, oh, can I have that? Can you put like a dragon in the background? He's like, yeah. And he showed it to me, and he did my whole trilogy cover set. So I have my covers already. I just need to finish the books.
Yeah. Okay. Give me the title again, and then give me your website.
Okay. The title is Cursed Dragon's Bride. Yolette is going to be the first one. And it's the Cursed Dragon Bride series. Okay. And the website is dreneebagby.com. All one word. That's pretty much all my stuff is Renee Bagby. So Instagram, Facebook, well, not Facebook, sorry. That's like author.dreneebagby. But yeah, Instagram, Twitter, what was the other thing? BookBub. Yeah, pretty much any place where they let you make your own thing. It's always going to be Renee Bagby. I try to keep it simple.
Yeah, good. Okay. James, what are you working on now, and where people can find you on the web?
All right, so you can find me on the web by going to jamesmaxey.net. If you are more Facebook-oriented, there is a fan group on Facebook called Dragonsgate, The Worlds of James Maxey, that I pop into from time to time. I'm working on another dragon book, but I will point out that today is a launch date for my writing book, which is called Write, Daydream, Type, Profit, Repeat. And it's really sort of a big overview book of how you could turn your imagination into income. So if you are, it actually comes from a panel I did at Con Carolinas, where we were talking about how to be a writer, and the writers ahead of me were all talking about how hard it was to make any money as a writer. And it got to my turn. I said, I don't know what you're complaining about. I daydream, I type it down, and people give me money. It's really a pretty good gig. So there's probably a few more steps involved, but that's why you should read the book. So the book I'm currently working on is the sequel to Dragonsgate Devils, which will be called Dragonsgate Spirits. At least that's likely what it will be called. And I've been slugging away at it for the last month or so, and it's been not going well. It's always bad when you're into a series and you don't like what's happening in the next book. And then just today, I had the revelation that what the book was missing was more dragons. And so I've had a character in this book from the beginning that was just introduced in the second book that's been a human. And today I came to the realization, no, if this character is a dragon, then it changes everything. And so now I feel like I've solved my bottleneck and can explode through the rest of the book.
That's wonderful.
Dragons.
Yeah. More dragons.
Yes. And it's always great when the writer's block gets blasted by dragons.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, Mary, what are you working on now, and where can folks find you on the web?
Okay. Well, people can find me at marimancusi.com. That's MariMancusi. I apologize. I realize my Zoom does not have my full name. Well, Dragon Ops just came out, and then Dragon Ops 2, which is Dragons versus Robots, comes out next year. But yeah, I love the title. I was glad they let me keep it. But I wanted to tell you about something that's really exciting to me. It comes out in November. It's a Frozen 2 prequel called Dangerous Secrets, the story of Aduna and Agnar. And it's a young adult romance about Elsa and Anna's parents and their story when they were teens and how they met. And if you've seen Frozen 2, they hint around a lot about the parents' backstory. So Disney came to me and asked me if I would write the parents' backstory. Cool. And it was such an amazing experience to work with them and build on Disney canon. As a big Disney fan myself, to be able to do that, to like build on their world was really fun. And they gave me a lot of freedom to tell the story the way I wanted to. We answered a lot of questions, I think, that came up in Frozen 2 that people are wondering. So I hope they'll provide some answers. And it comes out on November 3rd. So we're really excited. We haven't officially announced it yet. It's up for pre-order, but they're doing a cover reveal, I think, next week.
Oh, how cool. So hopefully the cover will be revealed by the time this goes.
Definitely will be. So yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining us here today, and Here Be Dragons. You've all been great panelists with great stories, and we really enjoyed having you. And thank you, the audience, for joining us. We can be found on the web either at ContinualConvention.com, our YouTube channel, Continual Convention, or on Facebook at the group Continual, the Never Ending Convention. Thank you all again, and good night.
Thank you.